All right, welcome to the conversation where we're going to have a conversation about a controversial topic. I know, color you surprised. But this one is quite touchy, especially with parents. But let's do it. Let's have that conversation. Justine Fonte joins us. She's an intersectional health educator, and recently she ran into some issues on this front. Justine, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Cenk.
All right, so what's your stance on talking to your kids about online porn, and what did that lead to for you?
My stance is that the first conversation on sex should not be about online porn with your child. We need to be talking about sexuality from the womb to the tomb, so that when they are inevitably exposed to pornography, it is a much easier conversation because they've already understood about body agency, about their body parts, about the diversity of bodies being completely normal, and really being able to be literate when they are exposed to porn as something that is meant to be a fantasy, but not an instruction manual on sex.
And how did that arise in controversy?
There were a couple parents who were very upset that their juniors, their 11th graders, were learning about pornography literacy in a school setting under a Zoom assembly this past spring, because they felt it wasn't appropriate for an academic setting. They reported that to the New York Post, and then that led to a whole onslaught of other interpretations of what I had done. Yeah,
and so in that context, what was your role?
My role was to come into the school and inform them of the different ways that pornography that is mainstream and available so easily for young people is something that can impact your body image. The lack of understanding on intimacy and relationships, the understanding behind consent not being modeled for you. And so I came in to do this 90-minute presentation with a Q&A. Students were extremely engaged, asking a ton of questions. It was very clear by their questions that this was a very pertinent topic to their lives and their peers' lives. But as a result of it being a Zoom assembly, parents were, I guess, eavesdropping into the class that day and had misinterpreted or taken out of context some of the topics that came up, and reported it in a way that I'm not used to, which is the press, as opposed to going to the teacher or the administrators that actually hired me to speak about this very topic.
Right, and you mentioned 11th grade. Was it for a specific class? Was it for the whole school? Or was it just for 11th grade?
It was just an 11th grade assembly of usually around 16, 17-year-olds, and there were about 120 of them. So it's typical for schools to bring in assembly speakers, and I just happened to be the one on the lineup for the spring.
And so were the parents concerned we should not talk about porn at all in the context of school? Was that the issue?
It was unclear. The way that it was depicted in the New York Post is that in general, pornography should not be something discussed at all in an academic setting. And the parents felt that they were not informed of this speaking engagement occurring. That is very uncommon for parents to not know guest speakers. So I had trusted the psychologists who had hired me to actually relay to parents. And I was told that they were informed of this because they asked for my bio and a blurb to be sent in the parent newsletter. So it was quite shocking to hear differently when I was reading it in the article.
Okay, so now let's clarify to the audience. New York Post is trash. So whatever they wrote is irrelevant because they're trying to smear anyone that they write about that isn't to the right of Attila the Hun. And so if you're having a sensible conversation, it is very likely that you will be smeared in the New York Post over it. It's owned by Rupert Murdoch, who's one of the worst people we've had the misfortune of having on this planet. It is what it is. Good people and bad people get born, they live. It is what, and unfortunately also control media companies. And by the way, just this is a fun little fact. New York Post loses, last we heard in the public, $50 million a year, every year. But Murdoch keeps it around for propaganda purposes. So now that we've clarified all of that, let's talk about whether you should teach your kids about sex overall, and as it relates to what they might see online. Now, Justine, I've got a daughter in 3rd grade and a son in 6th grade, and I know from my experience that they're too young for it. Although my son is getting real close to the age where he's not gonna be too young for it any second now, right? But 11th grade, are they joking? Are they serious? Or just like, now I'm not talking about the New York Post. I get it. They're driving a political agenda. Their political agenda is, oh my God, Democrats talk about sex with children, right? I get that part, right? But for the parents, do they really think that their kids in 11th grade that are 16 and 17 have not seen online porn? Is there one person left on planet Earth that believes that?
I think the parents have to realize that their kids are exposed to online porn. I think it's that the parents aren't ready to accept that because it means that they feel responsible for having to maybe have that conversation for the first time. And that's daunting. If you haven't had the sex talk yet, then yeah, having a talk about mainstream porn is gonna be extremely difficult. So I can imagine that the anxiety was really in part on being in a pandemic and it being already several months into it, and then hearing things coming out of your child's laptop that are things you probably were never taught, or you're dealing with your own sexual trauma that you haven't resolved or healed from yet. And so feeling like you now have to have conversations with your own child about this can make it feel really scary for parents. I'm just surprised by their method of projection in terms of that anxiety, which was by going to the New York Post.
No, that one I'm not surprised either. I guarantee you that 90% of them, if not 100% of them, were right-wingers who were looking to cry because that's their favorite hobby in the world. They love to cry. So just give them any reason and they'll, oh, New York Post, a liberal traumatized me with truth. But okay, now let's try to have an adult conversation, even though I make fun of Republicans and mock them. But okay, so how are you supposed to talk to your kids about it? Because it is super uncomfortable, and us parents would like to know when it's the right time.
Absolutely. Well, as I said earlier, you want to be talking about sexuality topics throughout the lifespan and not waiting until there's a Me Too story or in the context of a mainstream porn walk-in in your child's bedroom. But you want them to already be comfortable about these things. So assuming you have already done that, when the time comes to talk about specifically online porn and sexually explicit media, which is really smart to do it around 6th grade, 7th grade. So for prepping you, Cenk, and your child, it's important to let them know it's totally normal to be curious about your body, especially that your body's going through puberty now. You want to make sure it's healthy. Knowing if it's healthy or not and what it can do is not something you want to learn from mainstream porn. So if you're Googling something about your body, you can't really rely on the resources that might pop up because of how predatory a lot of the mainstream porn aspects of the industry are. But also it's not necessarily gonna be medically accurate, and that's definitely what they want. They want the assurance that their bodies are normal and that these changes are supposed to happen. When it comes to talking about relationships, you're not gonna learn intimacy through mainstream pornography. So it's about talking about healthy relationships and are these things in service of your safety, fulfillment, and pleasure. Those are the 3 main words that I bring over and over in all of my classes so that they can really exercise levels of scrutiny at determining if the relationships that are in are healthy for them. And then letting them know that, if you're not gonna learn physics by watching the Transformers, you definitely don't wanna learn sex by watching porn either. And so we have to really be literate about what we're exposed to is meant to be a fantasy or an entertainment industry and not an education industry.
Yeah, see that last word you use, fantasy, that's really what I wanted to focus on. Look, because some parts of this are easy. I already I didn't talk about it in the context of sex, but I talked about it in the context of don't believe anything you see online without double checking. Unless it's of course it's young Turks, then it's fine. But all kidding aside, I mentioned earlier on Monday's program to our audience, even if you're watching us at TYT, double check everything, right? And so, my son was watching some fun conspiracy theory stuff about the pyramids or stuff. And I'm like, that's not real, right? Stuff online is not necessarily real. And I'm also amused that, you use the word mainstream pornography. I'm sure you do it and it's legit, etc. But like, mainstream porn ain't mainstream. It's like that's the one thing where the mainstream is not overly healthy and safe and all that stuff, right? And so, I mean, when you go off mainstream, whatever the hell off mainstream is, that's really bad, okay? So, but on the other hand, porn is porn, right? But my question is do you talk to them about, hey, that's not good or that's not real sex? Or do you bifurcate and say that that's fantasy, but not real? You see what I'm saying?
Yeah, absolutely. With the juniors that I was speaking to, the 11th graders, I was talking to them about how you can really explore a lot of your body and understand your sexuality more through what you may be exposed to. And there's a body diversity that you can now access in ways that previous generations were not able to. But what's important to really recognize is most of porn, and when I say mainstream, I'm talking about not common, I'm talking about the easily accessible free porn that young people are usually accessing. And that porn is really telling us about messages on race and how we're racialized, exotified, and fetishized, especially for people of color, and how white doesn't have its own genre. It's telling you that you don't need to know about how the other person is feeling in an intimately physical relationship. It's not telling you how to exercise and understand consent. It's not showing you safer sex practices. So a lot of the things that are being modeled for you aren't things you want to apply in your real life. But by increasing your exposure to mainstream porn visuals, you may start normalizing these things and thinking that this is what's expected of you and expected of people that you're intimate with.
Yeah, look, we're out of time, but it's a really interesting topic because it isn't just about sex, it's also about culture. And so you're right, and I had not quite thought of it that way before, that the fetishes create a way of thinking about certain races and people that is absurd and gets reinforced subconsciously through porn. I mean, anyway, fascinating topic. Thank you for having a thoughtful conversation about it, as opposed to what apparently went on in the New York Post. Justine and Fonte, thank you so much for joining us. We appreciate it.
Thank you, Cenk.
Thanks for watching The Young Turks. Really appreciate it. Another way to show support is through YouTube memberships. You'll get to interact with us more. There's live chat emojis, badges. You've got emojis of me, Anna, John, JR. So those are super fun. But you also get playback of our exclusive member-only shows and specials right after they air. So all of that, all you gotta do is click that join button right underneath the video. Thank you.